Hi, you're watching Investor Insights, and in this video I'd like to talk a little bit about austerity and the issues with the concept. Now, austerity is simply when a government is forced to cut its debt or lower its debt levels. And there's a lot of problems with that. The way that government cuts its debt or its amount of spending is through basically cutbacks in spending on social infrastructure and social services. So no more upgrade of schools, hospitals, roads, whatever, and losses of jobs within the public sector. So it could be nurses, teachers, firemen, policemen. Again, it's a huge scope. Now, the problem with austerity measures, such as the ones seen in Europe, is that the timing is always wrong. Because, to best describe it, the whole economy is composed of three things. First, you've got Joe Blow, just the average consumer, the average member of society that's out there. He earns a living, pays his taxes. Then you've got the private sector, which is the companies, the businesses. And finally, you've got the public sector, which is the government. Now, what normally happens is that everybody has got their incomes and expenses, and each one accumulates their assets and their liabilities. The liabilities is what we're going to look at more importantly, which is their debts. So what happened in 2008 was that debt got too cheap and people levered up too much, which means they've taken on too much debt. And that's why it was referred to as a credit crunch, because debt was just becoming a problem because interest rates had to rise. Now, as I said before, austerity, the main issues with it is the timing, because the government finds that its debt levels are too high and it can't fund those liabilities. So the only way that it can get out of it is through cutbacks in its spending so that it can pay back its debt. Now that's deleveraging is not just only associated with the public sector at the time, because the credit crunch affected everybody. So the consumer has taken on too much debt. The private sector, the companies have taken on too much debt as well. So therefore, the consumer is trying to pay off the debt, the companies are paying down their debt, and now the government, in an attempt to pay off its debt, is going to cut back on its spending. This doesn't work when everybody is chasing austerity at the same time. So it's not that austerity in itself is a bad thing, because of all things, the government should be becoming smaller. The government shouldn't be taking so much debt and going into these huge deficit spending policies. But the thing is, they decide to do it always at the wrong time. Governments should be paying off their debts, or the private sector or people should be paying off their debts when interest rates are low. Now, this sounds a bit crazy because the advice that you're given is use debt when interest rates are low. But technically, we want to try and pay back as much debt as we can, especially when interest rates are low. But that's not what happens. in real life, everybody does the opposite. So technically, when austerity measures are taken upon by the public sector, they bite hard. They really turn economies backwards. Because, as I said before, the consumer has already had huge cutbacks, and the private sector itself is engaging in cutbacks at the same time. So technically, nobody's spending, everybody's saving. So how's an economy supposed to move forward when everybody's doing the same thing at the same time, especially paying off debt? So austerity measures, although sound in principle, when applied at the wrong time, which is always the case, not so good. So next time you hear about Greece or European countries having to go through severe austerity measures, have a feel for the consumer out there to know that not only is the government cutting back, but everybody else is cutting back at the same time. So things are going to get much worse than had the government not done anything.